Hello, so we're doing another One Piece and literature video. I've done a few of these before. So far, this is my favorite one this has been my favorite one to research so far. So to me, Thriller Bark is an amalgamation of Gothic literature, some of the greats, not just one singular book. But for this video, we're going to be looking at the three most obvious inspirations, or the three most obvious ones that I found, which are The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Castle of Otranto, and Frankenstein. There will be spoilers for all three of these in this video, as well as for Thriller Bark itself. So, my goal for this series of videos is not to say, look, Oda took inspiration from something. We all know that. But to dig a little bit deeper, to talk about those texts that Oda drew from and have that deeper conversation that he invites us to have by making these references and unpack the arc a little bit more so that we can see and appreciate even more how much Oda puts into his stories. I'm really excited about this one. I had so much fun researching this. I hope you'll like it too. We're going to talk about three great Gothic stories, how they align with pieces of this arc in story and in theme. I might even make you appreciate Absalom a little bit. And I'm so sorry about that. So let's start with The Island of Dr. Moreau. This one is going to be more focused on setting than plot. So the novel begins with the main character becoming shipwrecked and unable to continue forward. So they board a dinghy and end up on the island that the novel takes place on. On this island, he goes through the forest where shadows are moving and something seems to be following him. But every time he looks, whatever it is disappears. Eventually, our main character does meet this creature that was following him, which is one of the chimeras, one of the creatures of this island. And he goes into a cave and meets several creatures where he learns how they live and he witnesses them reciting this mantra, this law. So it's a law that reminds them to forsake their beastly instincts and instead act like men. Essentially, they're trying to forget who they once were so that they can take on this new identity that their creator is trying to force them to have. They have this very servanthood sort of role underneath the one that turned them into these creatures. And if they don't obey him, then they'll be subjected to torture, basically. So what Dr. Moreau is doing is he's transforming an animal into a human by vivisecting it, reconfiguring its body parts and combining it with parts of other animals. He's altering their body chemistry and implanting certain ideas into their heads. Naturally, Edward, the main character of the novel, is horrified at learning what Dr. Moreau is doing, and he confronts him and tells him, "You're not advancing science, you're just harming animals." Again, the inspirations that I found from this novel are more about the setting and the island itself, less so the plot. The novel ends with the chimeras regressing back to their beastly instincts and killing Dr. Moreau and all of his assistants and leaving Edward as the only living human on the island. On to the Castle of Otranto. So the Castle of Otranto follows a man named Manfred who is over this castle of Otranto. But there is a prophecy on his life that says that his bloodline is going to be snuffed out and ownership of this, or possession of this castle, is going to be passed on to its rightful heir, its rightful owner. And Manfred doesn't want that. He would like to continue to keep this castle in his family line. So he tries to prevent the prophecy by marrying off his sickly son to a young maiden, but because prophecy, he's magically killed by a giant helmet falling from the sky and crushing him right before the wedding. So Manfred declares that he's going to divorce his wife, Hippolyta. Yes, Hippolyta, presents himself to the maiden, Isabella, as her alternate husband, and when she refuses him, he assaults her to try to force her to bear him a new heir. She gets away, and he spends the rest of the novel chasing her around the castle so that he can capture her and forcibly marry her. There are also supernatural events that happen all throughout the castle as he's trying to capture this young lady to prevent him from committing this horrible sin. Things like moving portraits, ghosts, suits of armor that move, and a giant. And while I still think that aligning Sanji's dreams with the actions of one of the villains of this arc for the sake of a gag was a misstep, because it undercuts all the heroic and noble things Sanji did to save Nami. I do appreciate the storyline a lot more now that I know and understand a little bit more about its origins. Because not only did Oda make an arc that pays homage to Gothic literature, but in that arc, he took the story that's considered to be the origin of the Gothic genre and placed that story within his arc, but changed it a little bit so that the villain, the one who's trying to capture this maiden and force her to bear him in air, he has that storyline, but then he takes Hippolyta, who is the sweet, kind, wonderful wife that is being forced into divorce but doesn't really want it, but like she doesn't really have a choice because she doesn't have a lot of agency. Instead, he made Hippolyta a literal hippo, chasing him around, making Absalom, making Manfred, have to suffer the same way that he's making someone else suffer. I still have critiques of the execution of some of this, but now having read the book, it helps me to be able to appreciate what Oda was doing with this plotline so much more, and I'm so happy to have that. Finally, let's talk about Frankenstein. So, this is Frankenstein. Not this. That's a monster he made. Frankenstein? Not Frankenstein. Not Frankenstein? Frankenbeck. Got it? So Frankenstein follows a man that believes that through experimentation, he can discover the secrets of life and death, create a new species, and renew life. He wants to achieve something great, even if it comes at a great cost. Obviously, Hogback is who I think was inspired by Frankenstein. And I think Sindri is Frankenstein's cousin, who he was super in love with. Don't worry about it, that was normal back then. But Hogback started experimenting because someone he loved died and he wanted to find a way to renew life. The great twist of this arc is that the monster isn't one of Hogback's creations. It's Brooke. In the novel Frankenstein, the monster is this thing that strikes fear into everyone that sees him because of his horrifying appearance. He's a man who just wants companionship. He doesn't know how to relate to people, and any attempts at connection are refused. He's someone who's lived in isolation since the day he was created, and his ultimate goal is to have a companion to live his life with. In the novel, the monster seeks companionship amongst humans, but when he's rejected, he seeks out Victor Frankenstein and starts killing everyone he loves. Children, women, you name it, they die. Finally, he tells Frankenstein, if you'll make me a companion, if you'll make me a female monster that I can go away with, then I'll leave you alone, I'll leave humanity alone. I just don't want to live in isolation anymore. So Frankenstein agrees to make him a companion, goes off, starts creating her, and then once again is so horrified by his creation that he immediately destroys it and doesn't make good on his promise. So the story ends with Frankenstein trying to hunt down the monster to kill it, but instead he gets sick and dies. And then the monster weeps over his body, talking about how sad and isolated he is, about his immense suffering and regret, his hatred and the solitude that he's had to live with, and then he goes off to die. Gothic literature is fun. So Oda told the story of Frankenstein's monster, a creature that when you first see it, it's horrifying and repulsive, but then you learn that it's tortured, isolated, and just wants companionship. And we learn his story of seemingly endless suffering and isolation, but Oda ended his story of suffering when he found a family, when he found people who saw through the exterior and actually loved him and appreciated him. And on top of that, he has hope of being reunited with the friend that he lost, the one who is so loyal to him to the very end and who's waiting for him. So he now has that family that loves him for who he is, what the monster was looking for in the novel, as well as hope for a future of continued reunion and family. It's really beautiful. Anyway, my assessment of these inspirations is that Moria is inspired by Dr. Moreau. Hogback is Frankenstein. I think that one's really obvious. And I'm delighted to learn Absalom is from the Castle of Otranto. Never made that connection before I started. I really just thought I was going to talk about the 2 novels, and then I remembered the Castle of Otranto, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the one. Anyway, so what is this arc and its inspirations? We have Hogback, who tries to force life to continue after it's ended. We have Moria, who tries to force obedience from Hogback's creations and force them to forget their nature and their history. And then we have Absalom, who tries to force his own desires on another human being. Both the island of Dr. Moreau and Frankenstein really center around forcing your desires and will against nature, trying to take something that naturally should come to a close or should act a certain way and changing it, altering it to fit your own plan and scheme and desires. And they're both cautionary tales against this sort of thing. They're cautionary tales against forcing nature to act against its nature. And while this arc is obviously centered around fear and all things Gothic, it also gives great emphasis to those very things, to altering nature and altering what an individual's will is and imposing your own on them. And in a story all about freedom, obviously these themes fit really nicely. I love doing these videos. I know that they're not like the most popular thing that I do, but they're probably my favorite thing that I do in the One Piece sphere, just because it's so fun to dig a little bit deeper and see what those core inspirations were and see how much Oda not just took from them, but honored them while he created something completely his own. And this one was so fun to do. I hope you got something out of it. And if you noticed more inspirations that I didn't see, if you noticed some other novels that maybe I haven't read and so I couldn't draw the lines, please do let me know. Or if you just want to talk about it further in the comments, I would love that. I post videos every Monday and Friday on this channel, Tuesdays and Thursdays on my other channel, on my review channel, where I talk about what I'm reading week to week. Check out my Patreon if you feel like it. I do live readings of every chapter over there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye.